Today, John Potash talks about rattlesnake aversion training while Trinity learns how to avoid snakes.
Anybody who's going to be out hiking, camping, hunting with your dogs, it's really important if you're going to be in any rattlesnake prone area to teach your dog what a rattlesnake is and to avoid it. And there's different aspects to avoid. There's a lot of different scenarios in which you might find a rattlesnake. Sometimes you're going to be lucky and it'll just be out in the open and it might coil and rattle at you, so they need to know the sight and sound of it. Sometimes they're going to be secured under maybe a rock or a bush, hiding in the shade, coiled up and quiet. So it's really important for the dogs to know the scent of the snake. In fact, most dogs who get bit on the nose, and that's specifically because that's how they perceive the world around them. So they're gonna be sniffing, they smell something interesting, they go investigate, and we all know what can happen from that. So what we do is we set up a course with a variety of different stations to focus the dog's attention on different aspects of the rattlesnakes. And the first station is all about the sight and sound with the live rattlesnake out on the ground. The next stations focus completely on scent, so that they understand in different scenarios too. One would simulate maybe like a snake hiding in a bush. The other would be maybe a snake hiding out in a hole somewhere. So that way if they smell that snake, they're going to remember it and they're going to get out of there. This is a negative reinforcement training. We have looked into all the other options, and unfortunately things like positive reinforcement training really doesn't work in this kind of a scenario. I mean, that would require months and months of training to get them to understand it on the same level, whereas the negative reinforcement is an instant negative association to the snake or the smell or whatever aspect we're training for at that moment. And it's cemented in their brain as a bad scenario. I kind of like to use the child with the hot stove scenario. You could tell your kid a million times, don't touch it, it'll burn you, but until they actually experience it for themselves, they're gonna usually push the envelope. So the e-collars, and I like to call them e-collars, I don't like using the word shock collar because it's not really a true shock by definition. They operate like a TENS unit at a chiropractor's office. It's just an electrical pulse between the two prongs, creates an involuntary muscle contraction. But when they're not expecting it, it can be quite startling to them. And that's ultimately the effect we're going for, is the startle factor. So it's all about timing, that when that dog is engaged with that station, if they're looking, if they're smelling, they get that instant, oh my God, what was that? And they don't like it. And so you get a few of those in, and the dog understands really fast how it works. Now, given that every dog does respond a little bit differently to the e-collar, to the stimulation, I kind of also equate that to, say, like people. Sometimes you can come up behind a person and grab them by the ribs and scare them. And you have people who are freezers, like me. I'm kind of one of those. It's like, oh, okay, you got me. People like my brother are the type who are gonna scream and cuss and jump and maybe turn around and kick you or something like that. Dogs are kind of the same way. Some dogs are very stoic. It's just they're gonna kind of let go like that and that's it. Some dogs are gonna leap because it really startled them. Some dogs are gonna let out the occasional yip and yelp, which would be like the equivalent of us yelling, like But all in all, at the end of the day, it's a small price to pay compared to what a snake bite can do to a dog. And anybody who has any apprehensions about the collars, we're more than happy to let you come and feel it for yourself. Pretty much the reaction everybody gives once they feel it is like, oh, that's it? Because it really isn't that bad. But the dog doesn't understand it, so of course it's going to be a bigger deal in their head. We just had this little 6-month-old Jack Russell go through this class just now and didn't make a peep, so that's pretty typical of what really happens. Generally, like I said before, most dogs get bit on the nose, so they're going to get severe facial swelling. They will end up generally with necrosis unless they can get anti-venom flowing within an hour of the bite. Generally, you get a lot of tissue death, and then of course that requires long-term veterinary care. Obviously, they usually have to do minor surgery to breed the area from the dead flesh, things of that nature. I mean, a rattlesnake bite is just bad all around. If you're lucky and it's a mild bite, you might be looking at maybe a few $100s in just post care. But a severe bite, meaning like a lot of venom injected or a big snake, or depending where they get the dog, I've heard, probably the worst I've heard of is about $12,000 to save the dog's life, and some reconstructive surgery afterwards because he got it right above the eye and it was a little dog. So I mean, there's a wide range of things that can happen, but dogs are probably, I think statistically, about 20 to 25 times more likely to get bit than a person, again, just because they're exploring with their face. They are pretty tolerant to the degree that dogs don't die often, but there's a lot of variables in that too. The size of the dog, the age of the dog, the size of the snake, how much venom did it inject. I mean, these are all variables that, especially the venom aspect, that we just don't know. When a bite happens, you can't say what exactly happened, so you have to take him into the vet initially, and then of course, you know, from there it can just get worse and worse. No matter what though, just watching your dog go through all that suffering and pain, it's not something anybody should ever have to endure.
How does it work with the snake? So it's a live snake, right?
Yeah, so the first station, live snake out on the ground. We just kind of want to make that first encounter as natural as possible under these conditions, of course. We just walk the dog in the direction of the snake. We don't point it out to them. We just want them to find it naturally on their own. And then of course, once they engage, that's when they receive the correction from the caller. We usually make a couple of different passes, upwind, downwind, different angles, until the dog understands that that snake is associated with that negative consequence. And so they start avoiding it.
And does the snake have venom?
So the snake we use that's out in the open has had a venom duct surgery done, a ductectomy. I kind of refer to it as a venom vasectomy because there's a duct that goes between the gland and the fang, and it's a surgical procedure, so we have to go to a vet in Southern California. Basically, they just sever the duct and it renders them non-venomous. But we choose to do that over, say, muzzling, because muzzling snakes is very stressful on the snake and dangerous for the handler. Most of the time the muzzled snakes just kind of lay there. They don't really do much. Whereas these snakes don't know they've had that surgery, so they still act completely natural. They'll coil, they'll rattle, they'll even strike sometimes. Now, part of the dynamic is we always have a snake handler right there with the snake. We have the dog walker. We know the distances, so we don't let the dogs go in and get bit. But we do the venom duct surgery just as a safety precaution, because we all know accidents can happen.